This is the Leadership in Insurance podcast, brought to you by FinPro Search Partners.
Insurance companies are businesses and they need to look for the long term and be sustainable.
We went from 0 to 1 and now it's going from 1 to 100.
Insurance as a concept, as a kind of service, is brilliant. The execution is what we're looking at now. I think the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that are going to understand and master the art of intent. When we talk about innovation, we lean too heavily to think about technology and we don't think about creating a culture of innovation.
I think innovation is essentially continuous improvement of existing processes and platforms and product.
Right? It's got to be easy. It's got to be seamless.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership in Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bond. I'm lucky today to be joined by Finn Magee, CEO of InsurTech Canada. Finn, it seems like I see you every week or so lately, but very good to see you again. How are you?
Yeah, no, good, man. Thanks for having me on. It's kind of like you're a travel buddy for me nowadays. It's like every week in a new country.
Although it's funny because I remember we had to keep rescheduling our virtual meeting, and then I think before we managed to have it, we'd met about 4 times in various different conferences in different parts of the globe. So, it's a funny little circus that we're all part of. And you're very much part of it. And I've seen you kind of really sort of take an impact into the ecosystem. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. So, but before we start, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and obviously what InsurTech Canada is all about.
Yeah, 100%. For me, I come from a startup background outside of insurance. So kind of cut my teeth in the real estate world in startups, helping university and college students sublet their rooms. That led me to, a second startup that I built in entertainment, which was event planning that actually led to, a music festival. And what I learned from that was I loved startups. I loved the idea of not knowing what I was going to do the next day. And that led me into the insurance world. I basically helped a large TPA build a startup division, build a culture for a publicly traded company that was like a startup. And that was really my introduction to insurance, where I learned that it was an older industry. There was a lot of room for innovation. In leading that TPA sales in North America for a few years, I learned that there was a lot of InsurTech activity in the US. But not so much in Canada. In fact, I was meeting a lot of Canadian InsurTech founders in the US, and then going back home and doing business. So, for me, love doing business in the US, but I'm a sort of proud Canadian and wanted to find a way to, engage the Canadian InsurTech community. And that led me to, becoming pretty good friends with the guys who had founded InsurTech Canada in 2021. And as of last September, I took over InsurTech Canada to basically grow it, remodel it, and put Canadian innovation on a pedestal globally.
Amazing. It's interesting to take something like that over. I don't know how direct you want to be about this, but you've obviously transformed it into your own image. Because I didn't know InsurTech Canada, so it's really interesting that since you've come in, like just the prominence and awareness and your visibility has improved it greatly. But what was your first impression of what you'd inherited? And what did you set about doing or changing, whether that's culture, whether that's infrastructure, to sort of build the vision of what you want it to be?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I inherited was a super strong, brand name. And at least in Canada, a brand that was sort of known, but not really. And the founder is a really good friend of mine. His name's John Harvey. He's still, on the board today. For him, he had focused on his own InsurTech. And for him to do that plus running InsurTech Canada was impossible. So that was the main reason he wanted to hand over the reins to me. And so, yeah, I'll say that, the brand that I inherited was good. A name like InsurTech Canada is pretty powerful. And from there, it was just about committing full time to, providing really good value add for anyone we were working with. So instead of just being involved with InsurTechs like we were before, and doing, the odd meetup, now we work with, InsurTechs across the board in Canada, but also helping them expand outside of Canada and helping international companies enter Canada. That's why you'd see a lot of presence from me globally. But then also working with the carriers, the brokers, the MGAs, consulting on their processes, understanding where, problems need to be fixed. And then having that needs analysis complete, we can then plug in the InsurTechs there. Then the last piece would be with capital, right? So providing deal flow for them, anyone who has appetite for the Canadian InsurTech market. That's what's been different, is involving everyone else in the ecosystem, not just the InsurTechs, because it's never just about the InsurTechs, it's about everyone.
I agree on that. I mean, some of the associations that we always support them, and I see my role with this podcast really is that this is my way of giving back to an ecosystem that's been very kind to me. We don't charge for it, never have. We just want to promote the right stories and innovation and tales of that. Obviously, it doesn't hurt from a personal brand perspective, but genuinely, it's my way of putting back into that. But there can be an echo chamber. It can be a bunch of InsurTech startups getting together and moaning about VCs, struggling to raise capital. So connecting the dots between like the actual insurance ecosystem they might sell to, the investors that might come together. Yeah, it's a really important role. But I think one thing that you talked to me about was sort of restructuring from a non-profit to a for-profit, a deal flow focused organization. It's quite a bold call. Just wanted to understand, like the thinking behind that, and how did the existing community respond to that change?
I think for me to be sort of on stage in some points, representing our for-profit companies, I want to have the same attitude that they do. I want to be for-profit as well. I know a lot of great nonprofits out there, especially ones that are charity focused, but for me to go ahead and say, I'm for-profit, I'm deal flow oriented, that's what our members want out of it anyways. If they want to be a part of a community, that they want to network. But at the end of the day, the real value they're going to get is from me going out there and grinding and, putting deals in front of them. And so I think the for-profit mindset is the reason that it changed. Of course, the second piece is the for-profit InsurTech Canada is growing into a really strong foundation to then support a fund that, we're going to stand up. So being for-profit, makes it a lot simpler structural-wise. But overall, I think it's, the mindset. For me to be for-profit aligns really well with all of our member companies' goals, which is profit.
Yeah, and that I think the mindset thing's the important thing for me. Like I say, worked with a lot of associations, been around a lot of them, and sometimes they feel like government bodies. They feel like, and look, some good government bodies as well that understand profit, but there is a baked-in nature of commerciality to for-profit enterprises, and a lot of these associations by nature are trying not to make profit. They're just covering their costs, and I think it just drives different decision making, different focuses. And some of the things, I remember getting in the room to one of these associations and said, "Oh, we've got a bunch of investors here," and I looked around the room and went, "I don't know who any of the investors are." And that's not to say I know every investment, I don't, but in a certain market, whether it's London or the US, there were just certain very big InsurTech players. And I'm like, if they're not in the room, you're missing the point almost. The active players aren't here. So, it was interesting to say, like, if you've been commercially minded, you would just know who's actually actively investing. Who are they? And you've got them in the room. So you can see it in the quality of the things that you get. And I think that quality issue is something you've really addressed. So you deliberately now have curated membership of, I think it's 24 companies at the moment, or is it gone up? Is it 24?
Yeah, well, it actually has gone up. I think we're 27 now.
Yeah, so 27. But I know that you're very sort of strict on the criteria of who comes in, rather than casting the net wide for as many people as possible. How do you evaluate who makes the cut? What's the secret sauce? And is it founder or product, or is it premise? Is it thesis? What are you really looking for when you make those decisions?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'll say I am strict on who we bring in, because at the end of the day, if we're consulting for a carrier and we bring forward a bad company or a company that doesn't have legs or a founder who is maybe not ethical, that's InsurTech Canada's name on the line, right? So that's why we're super strict. And we've started due diligence processes, from the beginning. So that when we move into the fund stage, most likely next year, those processes will already exist. But for me, the secret sauce is about the founder generally. It's someone like you and I, we've met several times, we get along super well. That in my mind, goes a long way. Whereas if there's a founder out there who, and this is rare, but if there's a founder out there who maybe, isn't ethical, or I don't like their business practices, or we just don't vibe or get along, then I'm not going to enjoy working with them. I don't feel comfortable introducing them to the rest of our network of investors or, potential buyers. I just don't see the point in working with people like that. And I don't need to. Like, someone could offer, a check to get into the community, but at the end of the day, my reputation and InsurTech Canada's reputation is a lot more important. So it's for sure about the founder. And then, like I mentioned, when we consult for any of our carrier partners or broker partners, or we chat to, VC partners or investors, we know what they're looking for. So generally, product market fit is pretty key for any of our members coming in. There could be an idea that isn't needed yet, and we'll sort of help incubate that and help guide them on that journey. But overall, founder huge, and then a little bit of product market fit just to make sure what they're doing is applicable and they're solving a problem that exists, not creating a new problem. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense, and I think to me that last point of like creating a problem that doesn't exist, that I've got my spider sense up at the moment. I've been quite vocal about some of the valuations are concerning me at the moment. Some of the outside capital from outside insurance. We've got the return of lots of like founders from outside the industry, which I celebrate, because we need ideas coming in. We need innovation. But I'm starting to see this theme of conversation, which was what happened 5 years ago when there was, 4 years ago, it was a bit of a bubble moment where people going, insurance is stupid, it doesn't know what it's doing, it's behind the curve, from people not from the industry. And I thought, this feels like an echo of the bubble of the past. So I think being more stringent on making sure they're addressing actual problems that exist in the insurance ecosystem, or creating genuine opportunities. Like, it's great to produce a net new line of insurance business, but can it be profitable business? Can it be scalable business? And these are questions that we need to answer. But I agree with you. I mean, the reason I long term, I've made no bones about the fact that I want to get into the investment space. That's why I do angel investments, is that the only thing I know is people. And the theme, I would say, over the 20 years of working in recruitment, but particularly the last 5 on working with startups that come from, their seed and they get to like Series D and they're really successful, is that the people dictate that. And you can see it day one. You're like, this is a person that people can work with, is smart enough to change, is going to work hard enough. There's all those kind of like very, very deeply held personal values around that. And particularly, I suppose, when, as you say, then you're also not representing just you, but Canada, which is a huge responsibility. Finn is a very proud Canadian. For anyone not watching, he has got the Canadian flag in the background, which I really like. It's also prudent because we've got the football going on, so you can support your team. But they won very handsomely last night, so 6-0 in the soccer.
I mean, growing up, it was always Canada's not a soccer football nation. Watching the game last night, 6-0, just felt good.
Yeah. I actually stayed up to watch it, which is very sad, but I'm that guy. Anyway, back to InsurTech. We must focus. So let's talk about the investment fund. You mentioned it. Longer term vision, establishing your own fund to directly invest. Why do you think that's the right structure for this type of organisation? And what will having capital change about your relationships with the wider market?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when I look at our day to day, like what we do for our InsurTech members or even some of our MGA members, is create a really great advantage for them. A lot of the times you'll have a founder who comes from outside of insurance. They have a really, really good idea, but as you and I know, this game is completely relationship based, and you can be kind of screwed if you don't know anyone. So what we're doing is helping InsurTechs grow. And in my mind, we've done our due diligence on the founder, the product. We believe in it. We're going to do our best to help them scale. Why wouldn't we, have skin in the game with these companies? So in my mind, that's 100% the reason why we want to be investing in not all of our member companies. Like, not all of them are going to have investments. Some of them are going to be too late for us. Some of them, might just not make sense and might still be members. But overall, I think being able to cut a check in, seed or Series A to some of our members to help them grow is something that I want to see. happen. I know a lot of Canadian investors want to see that happen too. It's a very timely conversation talking about Canadian capital supporting Canadian companies because our landscape as a country right now, I think last year was our lowest VC funding year in like 50 years. And we get a lot of US capital, which is great, but you can see sort of a productivity issue in Canada right now where we're not investing in our own companies. So, of course, InsurTech Canada, it makes total sense to invest in these companies because we're helping them, but there's perhaps a bit of a Canadian pride thing here for me too, where I want to see Canadian companies succeed and then grow past, the Canadian market, see them succeed globally. And if we can write the check to help that, then, we're both winning.
There's a couple of questions I was thinking about there. I might ask them back to back because I'll probably forget what they are if I don't ask them like this. So, first one is that I think just Canada suffer from, particularly, I'd probably broader tech innovation, but obviously we're applying it to InsurTech here. There's an inherent problem in the UK industry where some of our best talent just goes to the States, like immediately. So we're losing that. Is that one of the things that you think is impacting the investment market because they're following the talent and that's moving overseas?
100%. We have a term for it. We call it brain drain. And to be fair to the US, it makes total sense why our talent would go down there right now. Like Canada is the most educated country per capita in the world. We have so much talent. When you look at large language models nowadays, those were developed in Canada in 2012 through AlexNet. Like we have the tech talent, but you can make a lot more money in the US because of tax structure, because of grants and their venture landscape. It just makes total sense to go to the US. So we 100% have that problem. And I think it's regulatory bodies that need to fix that and incentivize staying in Canada. And it sounds like it's the same thing in the UK too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, without getting on my political high horse, I mean, it's one of those things that, we don't incentivize. Tax breaks for small businesses are just not, they're eroding every day. I mean, it's now reached the point that most entrepreneurs in the UK will know this, where it used to be a tax advantage to run a limited company and pay yourself through dividends. It's now negligible. So I might as well take a salary instead. And that sort of lack of reward for starting a company is, and I know I'm not innovating anything. Well, I think we are actually in some of the stuff that we do, but like generally speaking, I'm doing a business that's been before, but just as an entrepreneur, it's like there is limited tax relief really for us. There is some on innovation and you can get credits back, but it's not really a great landscape. So again, you lose people to the US, and people always ask me, why do I trade in the US? It's much more commercially minded. People make more investment. There's more growth. There's more focus on growth and scale and speed. Whereas in the UK, it's saving your pennies, and actually then we become a nation of shopkeepers, and that's not in a positive way. I've remembered my second question I was going to ask you about that, so I'm very pleased with myself. Is there going to be a potential conflict when you've got a fund? Have you thought about this? It's like some companies you invest in, some you don't. Or is it just about being super transparent on, we're not investing, here's why, but we still think you're a great organization? Because potentially there's a sort of mixed message there.
Yeah, it's about transparency for sure. That's been my thing since day one with all of our members, is transparency. Like at the end of the day, we have to be unbiased towards companies we work with. If there's two companies selling the same product, we'll help them both. But the thing is, let's say, there's two companies, they're never going to be exactly the same, and they're going to be a better fit for different parties based on what we know about them. So with investing in some of the companies, some of them are going to want funding from us, some of them won't. Sometimes the capital that we have, on our table is going to be super applicable. Whereas me, I come from a claims background. If it's a claims tech, our capital is going to be really applicable because we know the space, we're super connected there. Whereas, if it's a company that's been built in Canada, they've already raised a seed in Canada, and they're like 100%, we want to go to the US for the next 5 years. We want to raise a Series A in the US to help our growth there. Then, I might reach out to you, or I might reach out to David and Tony at InsurTech New York and say, it doesn't make sense for us to invest in this company, but it might make sense for you. So I think just transparency, and even though a company might be a member of InsurTech Canada, taking our capital just might not be the right fit sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, I've had that conversation a lot with particularly UK companies actually, and they don't. I think this is where some of the knowledge isn't great internationally for UK businesses. That they've said, "Oh, we want to go after the US market." It's like, "Well, go and get US money, go and get US VC money," because that's where they're plugged in. That's where they have a network. That is that smart money that can help you. So yeah, it's a really good point about strategically taking the right money is interesting. Um, Talk to us about the Canadian Insurtech market. What's the state of it right now? Where do you think you're really strong? And I know, like, define Insurtech step one, but there's tech-driven MGAs, data-driven MGAs. There's like actual technology and core systems, etc. And I know Canada covers a lot of it. But is there any areas where you think the market's particularly strong with the Canadian Insurtech piece?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think when you look at Canada as a whole, Canada has always sort of been a very, very risk averse nation.
Yeah.
Because of that, when you add in the insurance element to that, you can say we kind of are 2 to 3 years behind generally on any trend when it comes to adopting technology, in this case in insurance, right? So overall, I would say where Canada is super strong is not messing up on trends. We'll wait for a US or a UK to hop on a trend and take that risk. And if it fails, we don't go after it. We wait to see what works. So I think in that sense, Canada's really good at looking at trends and then building off of those trends in other nations. To get more specific on InsurTechs, defining it is a hilarious thing for me. When I look at InsurTech, they're a tech service provider. An MGA is an MGA. They can be really tech forward, but to me, InsurTech is a service provider, and we work with both for sure. A lot of really cool product innovation, from our membership base. For example, we work with a company called Flora. They're in, fertility benefits. Lots of new business line thinking is great in Canada. And then from, an operational perspective, within the claims world, like even like hardware tech that's, IoT notifying, levels of moisture in rooms. It goes from that, all the way to one of member companies called Wise Docs, which is, document submission, which has been a pretty common thing, but they're really good at choosing a niche and servicing it really well. So in this case, they do medical records. So I think across the board, P&C or life, there's a ton of innovation coming from Canada, and overall just really, really strong at hopping on a trend that makes a lot of sense in another country and implementing that well into a niche in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a restriction on the Canadian market as well. Was it 38 million people in Canada? So the trend I've observed is that a lot of Canadian insurtechs obviously have to expand internationally quicker than the US counterparts. But US obviously got this enormous market. A lot of them seem to go to the UK, Australia, which I suppose makes sense. What advice do you give to founders in your cohort when they're looking to expand and where they're looking to expand?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think for sure, 38 million people in Canada, it's not big. For any insurtech to grow to the level that they want to, they're going to have to expand inside of Canada eventually. And that's, another reason why you and I hang out in different countries all the time is because I'm actively building bridges to make that transition easier for our member companies. It's going to be a pretty daunting thing. I'm going to move my business. We're going to open up a branch in Australia. Damn, that's a commitment, and that's a 24-hour flight. The advice I give is for sure, you want it to be sort of opportunity oriented. So you don't just want to open up 0 opportunities. You need to do a lot of pre-work, building bridges to see if you're a fit. But I would also say, depends on the type of business, but generally the UK or Australia compared to Canada from a regulatory environment are way more similar than the US. So, let's say you're opening up in Australia, it's a big commitment travel wise. But from a regulatory standpoint, if you want that to be easier, I recommend Australia. Whereas entering the US, geographically super convenient. We'd have the same conversation, be ready to, localize your product to the US deal with the state by state nuances that exist. But for sure, I made this mistake with my first startup, which was spreading our company way too thin before doing what we do really, really, really well in one small, even in that case, it was a city. So the biggest thing is don't rush to expand outside of Canada right away just because our sales cycle is slower here. Dig really, really deep and do your best to do really, really well here so that your use cases are ready to go to a new country, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just when you say obviously we want to do for a minute. But we were talking about the US. People say, "Are you entering the US?" It's like you're basically entering 50 individual countries almost, because the state by state regulation, and they don't all play ball, and they take different amounts of time. And some, people are obsessed with being US wide, and it's like, you don't need to, like there's certain markets that are so large that you go, well, actually, if you're in California, for example, for certain markets, it's like being in a different country. So, I think people can be very broad brushed with it, and it can seem like the aspirational move, but as you rightly say, the regulatory kind of parallels between, Canada and Australia, for example, makes it easier. And as long as your market becomes big enough across your company, it doesn't matter. I mean, like the temptation, turning back myself, people quite often go to the traditional insurance market. And I'm like, because there's enough money to be made in InsurTech, and I'd rather be really good at that. If a couple of years down the line, one of my team comes up to me and said, we're going to, go and do search into the big corporates, sure, but you do that. I'm going to do this bit for now. So just I knew we'd do this. It was almost at time. So I wanted to ask you sort of a last question, but I'm going to cheat and throw loads in there. So I think I know some of this anyway, but really good to know what your vision of InsurTech Canada looks like in, let's say, 5 years' time, size and scale, maybe kind of what the things. And then maybe just broader, the Canadian InsurTech market, what does it need to do to sort of reach its potential on a global stage, do you think?
Yeah. So I think from an InsurTech Canada perspective, between now and the next 5 years, the way I see it is, if my data is correct, we've onboarded over a quarter of the InsurTechs in Canada in the past, 8 months since I started running it. I'd like to see in the next year or two, we work with 100% of the InsurTechs. Of course, the ones that are viable are the ones that I'm talking about, where there's a good founder and a good product, and not just something that's been vibe coded off Claude yesterday. I know you and I see a lot of. So
we do.
So not that, but for sure, the right InsurTechs, I want to work with all of them. But I think more importantly, in the next, couple of years, I'd like to be able to onboard, all of the carriers and brokers and MGAs and mutuals. Because, in my mind, coming from a service provider background, it really is all about that group. So we want to make sure we're working with all of them. And I think what that'll do for us is give us a super, super strong foundation to help our InsurTech succeed in Canada. And then the use cases we'll get from working with all the different carriers in Canada makes a really, really powerful proposition for our InsurTechs to then scale past the Canadian market. So from a global lens, I'd love to see Canada as, a go-to hub for InsurTech innovation. I'd love to see, we already have a bit of this now, international companies wanting to enter the Canadian market as their first international expansion, which is great, and I think the right call. But I'd love for us to be the go-to place where we now host the biggest InsurTech conference in the world. And, we are the ones who are driving innovation for insurance globally. That's the dream. It'll take a bit to get there, but for sure, it's about, for me, engaging the rest of the Canadian market first, and then seeing what we can do globally.
Oh, Finn, please start the biggest InsurTech conference, because I'd really much rather go to Toronto than I would to Vegas. If I had to pick a city in Canada, I'd probably rather go than Vegas. But as much as I love the guys at ITC and the conference, just get me out of that desert hellhole as much as possible.
Great.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, Finn, thank you so much for your time. I've been looking forward to doing this. It's been a long time coming. And look, I expect to see you at an InsurTech conference very soon. And And I will be shamelessly hitting you up for some recommendations around Toronto because my friends are about to go there. So, but I'll do that off it.
Yeah, 100%. Always happy to help with that. And yeah, I mean, if I can't convince you to come to our Calgary Stampede events in a couple of weeks, it's probably September because I'm Canadian and we disappear for the summer.
Oh man, I love that. I love that. Well, look, thanks again for being a guest on the Leadership and Insurance podcast. Thanks, Vin.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.